Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 185 of the Masterclass podcast. My name is Cam Brennan, and of course, I am joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Dave Hogue. What's up?
Uh, it's good to be here. I'm really happy, believe it or not. Probably doesn't come through, but
Oh, you sound ecstatic, Dave. So,
I am. I actually am. Like, one of the things that I'm happy about is I'm looking out the window and it's light outside at a time that it's usually dark.
well, I can tell you from the far eastern reaches of the central time zone, the
But
sun
you're
has
further
already
north.
set here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Not only am I further north, I'm 25 miles from the eastern time zone. So
Yeah,
it
I
gets
did know.
darker way earlier here
Right.
than it does where you guys are at.
Huh. But summer is around the corner. Like, it is that sort of, I don't know. I know you like the cold weather, but
I do.
the older I
But,
get,
you know,
the less I like it.
It would be selfish of me to expect it to be cold all year round. There are plenty of folks who need their warmth for their sanity
Yeah.
and their
Yes.
sunshine. So there's one of my friends from church, and she's also one of the volunteers in my youth group. She hates the cold, unsurprisingly, even though she's born and raised in Illinois. And they have a pool at their house, and summertime is just her jam. And I was over their house actually on Mother's Day, hanging out and eating lunch with her family and all that, and she had a hoodie on and it just said literally freezing. And I saw it, and I had been there for like a half hour before I realized what it said, and I was in the kitchen and I just started laughing out loud. I was like, that is the most accurate hoodie that you could possibly own. Like, mine would say something like, it's freezing out and I'm very happy. But it's the perfect thing for her, and it made me laugh quite a lot. And I realized that was a complete, you had to be there and know the entire backstory story, so it made sense to no one else. But I said it anyways, Dave.
That's quite all right.
That didn't make it any better. Anyways, we're here. It's exciting. Dave, if there was a myth and a legend about you, what would you want it to be about?
A myth and a legend. That's talk about catching somebody off guard. A myth and a legend. I feel like it's right there on the tip of my brain, and I can't quite articulate it. Don't know.
Bummer.
Yeah.
I realize that's a bit of a ridiculous question to ask. But I introduced you as the man, the myth, and the legend, so I was just
I was
curious.
I was tracking.
What would a myth or legend about Dave Hogue be?
A myth or a legend about Dave Hogue?
One time in college, you ate 12 whole pizzas in one night.
Yeah. No.
Mine would
I'll
be
have to think about that.
Mine would be something really, really stupid. Like, the myth is that I'm really, really ugly and really, really smelly and quite dumb. Then people meet me and they're like, "Oh, you're not smelly, dumb, or that ugly." And so it would, they would. That's such a stupid thing to say. I don't know why I said that out loud. This is going really well, Dave.
Yeah, we don't have any listeners left now.
So, anyways, we're going to talk about the Bible because clearly we are very awkward and uncomfortable talking about anything else. So we're going to carry on in chapter 8. But before we do that, I want to do a bit of follow-up from last episode about the last verse that we read, which is verse 7 in chapter 8. And it says, "For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second." And so quick recap of last episode. We were talking about the first half of chapter 8 in the book of Hebrews, and it's comparing like the Old Testament or the Old Covenant versus the New Covenant. So the covenant that God had with Israel versus the covenant that God has with his people, Israel plus the Gentiles through Jesus, and sort of the differences and comparisons there, and why the New Covenant is better than the Old Covenant, why it was necessary, how it's different. We're going to get into that more here in the second part. But I wanted to read a little bit from um, F.F. Bruce's commentary on Hebrews. And it says this about the Old and the New Covenant. It says, the defect did not lie in the covenant law, the Old Covenant. It was good in itself, but to borrow Paul's language, it was weakened by the flesh, Romans 8:3, by the inadequacy of the human material which it had to work upon. What was needed was a new nature, a heart liberated from its bondage to sin, a heart which not only spontaneously knew and loved the will of God, but had the power to do it. The new covenant was a new one in that it could impart this new heart. It was not new in regard to its own substance. I will be their God, and they shall be my people, quoted here, Jeremiah 31:33, was the substance of the covenant of Moses' day. I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, was God's promise to the Israelites while they were still in Egypt, Exodus 6:7. I will be your God, and you shall be my people, was his promise to them when he had given them his law in the wilderness, Leviticus 26:12. A promise taken up and applied in apostolic days to the people of the new covenant in 2 Corinthians 6. And in the New Testament apocalypse, when a new heaven and earth come into being and God's dwelling place is established with his people, the ancient covenant promise is repeated. They shall be his peoples, and God himself shall be with them and be their God, Revelation 21:3. But while the formula, you will be my people and I will be your God, of the covenant remains the same from age to age, it is capable of being filled with fresh meaning to a point where it can be described as a new covenant. I will be your God acquires fuller meaning with every further revelation of the character of God. You shall be my people acquires deeper significance as the will of God for his people is more completely known. So obviously, that is a lot, but what sort of blew my mind is the trace of the covenant promise, you will be my people and I will be your God, from the beginning of the Bible all the way to the end. Which,
yes,
I'll be honest, I didn't realize that trail existed in that way, and that God, at the different points of redemptive history, is reciting the same promise. But what I love here at the end, and I'll read it again, I will be your God acquires fuller meaning with every further revelation of God's character. And ye shall be my people acquires deeper significance as the will of God for his people is more completely known. So as we see the revelation of God's character go from God speaking to Abraham and saying, I'm going to make a nation out of you, to saving the people of Israel out of bondage in Egypt through the Exodus, to delivering them to the promised land, all the way up through the acts of Jesus in his ministry, and then all the way to the new heaven and new earth, coming together and all things being made right as the promise goes, that as our understanding of God's character widens and deepens, there's more meaning and more power behind him saying, I will be your God. And as we understand what that means and what his will is for us as his people, there's more power to him telling us, you will be my people, and what that belonging means, what him choosing us means. It's really, really, I've never had the old covenant, new covenant comparison explained that way before. And I think it's incredibly powerful to see God's consistency in message coupled with difference in what it means based on when and how that promise is delivered and through whom or what circumstances it's delivered. Um, yeah. Does that any of that make sense?
Yeah. And so I just happened to read this today. And it's Paul in Romans 7 talking about the whole I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. And verse 14, I think reiterates what you began with there. And it says, "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am flesh, sold under sin." And so just that whole being dependent on people, the flesh, even though the covenant was spiritual, I am of the flesh. And so, and I don't want to get into Romans 7. We've already talked about that, but there's a ton to unpack there. And then just that second, so that was kind of my first piece in what you shared. And then the second one was, very much just that continuity, that consistency of who God is, and that consistent message of being his people. So I feel like I'm now muddying what you just said.
No,
but,
yeah. So what comes to mind is the consistency, right? But it's the consistency of the message, but it's also the consistency of his purpose and of his will to see his purpose accomplished, right? It's the wholehearted, consistent purpose of what God is intending to do. And right now we're going through Ephesians in a youth group, and we literally just talked about this last week. I can find it here. Yeah, it's Ephesians chapter 1, and it says, in him we have in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace, which he lavished upon us in all wisdom and insight, making known to us the mystery of his will, according to his purpose, which he set forth in Christ as a plan for the fullness of time, to unite all things in him, things in heaven and things on earth. So from the beginning of time, right, before God created anything, it says earlier in Ephesians that he chose us before, the foundation of the earth, that he has adopted us into his family as his children, and with it all the benefits that come with being a child of God, that he chose us, he redeemed us, he predestined that we would be part of this family. And all of that he chose before the beginning of time was for this purpose, to unite all things in heaven and earth in him. That was the goal from day one. And then when you take that framework that Paul has laid out, and then you look at what it says here in Hebrews, and what F.F. Bruce says here about what Jeremiah prophesied about when Josiah was king and Israel and Judah were split way, way back, you see the same thing. Whether it was with Abraham, whether it was with the Exodus, whether it was with Jeremiah, whether it was with Jesus, or whether it will be in Revelation. You will be my people, and I will be your God, aka we will be united. We will be united in me. I will make this happen. And you see what the law pointed to, which was you can't do it on your own. We will be united.
Right.
You can't make it happen. Only I can make it happen. And then we look at it from the new covenant perspective. You couldn't make it happen, so I made it happen. Pointing back at Jesus, but also pointing towards the end when heaven and earth will come together and all of you. It's just it's like he had this plan the whole time, Dave.
Yeah. That's just kind of amazing.
It's like really, I haven't thought about like the the meta narrative of the Bible in this way before. I always think like, oh, creation, fall, Old Testament, Jesus, New Testament, Revelation, end times, right? Like in terms of like actions or stories in the Bible, right? Some people might call them dispensations based on their theological background, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've never thought about it as God's purpose that he declared before the foundation of the world, and then how that purpose and his will to have that purpose come to fruition, like intercedes at different points throughout scripture. Consistent message,
Mm-hmm.
different presentation sometimes, but consistent message and consistent purpose. It's kind of blowing my mind a little bit, Dave. I don't know. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So, shall we read through what we're going to talk about?
Sure.
And then hop on that train.
We sure can. All right. So we'll read verse 8 through 13. And as Cam has already mentioned, pretty much everything but the first and the last of those comes actually from Jeremiah 31. For he finds fault with them when he says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother." That's verse 11. "And they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will be merciful towards their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more." And speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away.
All right.
Yeah. So, it starts with what, you opened with and from verse 7 in terms of, finding fault.
Mm-hmm.
And it's finding fault with them, right?
Yeah. Turns out people have issues, Dave.
Yeah. So he finds fault with them. And then, again, just it plays into what we were talking to of we're dealing with prophecy brought by Jeremiah, and the days are coming. There's this future perspective. And as we're reading this in Hebrews, it's no longer a future perspective. Mm. It's now taking that look back at what Jeremiah said all that time ago. And lo and behold, it has become true. It happened.
Yeah. And so what's interesting, and the only reason I know this is because I actually did some homework beforehand and read in a couple commentaries to try and understand this reference to Jeremiah and what was going on. And so Jeremiah was a prophet in the time of King Josiah, who was actually a king of Judah, which is the bad one as far as the history is concerned, right? And so based on what Jeremiah has written and what we know historically, Josiah made, faith in God, being part of, a good Israelite, like the national religion in Judah, but it was that. It was the nationally decreed, the king says you must do this, so you do it. It was essentially, Pharisaical type of faith. You do it to be seen, you do it because it's the right thing to do, but your heart isn't changed. It's merely the, intellectual or social pressure to do what you're supposed to do. And so when it says, I'm going to establish a new covenant with Israel and Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers, uh, when I took them out of Egypt, for they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. Imagine Jeremiah saying that to the very people that are essentially living a lie. He's calling out their lack of true faith. Even more so in 10, where it says, "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of the Lord after those days, declares for the house of Israel. I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." Right, and so this is that other aspect of it. Right, it's not just you will memorize my verses. Like there's passages in Deuteronomy about how important it is to know and understand. Like it says, like wear them on your head, like those weird boxes that they used to wear around their heads. You know, talk to your children as you're coming and you're going, and have them understand the word of the Lord. It's yes, there's that intellectual understanding of it, but we're never promised in the Bible that if you memorize it, it will, it will come true or it will be more powerful. But it's this concept that we see in the new covenant with the giving of the Holy Spirit to all of God's people in greater power, that God is not after our intellectual assent or acknowledgement. He's after the very core of who we are, our beings, our souls. What causes us to act and to will and to purpose and to think and to plot and scheme. All of that internal stuff that only, as far as I'm concerned, the only two beings in the entire universe that know what I'm thinking at any given moment are me and God. Right? And he's after that stuff. Not just can you pass a Bible quiz at Awana on Wednesday night. Or look good in church because you know how to flip to Habakkuk faster than everybody else. And so Jeremiah's, God through Jeremiah is calling out the hypocrisy in Judah and saying, I'm going to do it with a new covenant. I'm maintaining my promise. I will be their God and they will be my people. But I'm going to do it in a different and greater way because I'm going to, what is it? It says exactly, put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts. And writing things down back then, more so than now because of technology, was a statement of permanence, right? It was how things were remembered and passed down generation to generation. It's how things were confirmed. It's how things were, verified and solidified. You wrote it down. And so by doing that on his people's hearts, he's signifying with the new covenant the greater depth, the greater power, the different approach to apply the age-old message, which is, it's good stuff, Dave.
Yes. And it kind of, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here of just, for those of you who are listening, I don't know how much time people spend in the Old Testament, but go read 1st and 2nd Kings. Go read and read what they did. And, just, there's even just that consistency of, the kings that chose God and did what was right in his eyes. And then those that, you could have this king that was doing all the right things and, just had God's blessing. And then his son comes along and just totally jacks it up. And I don't know. It's really fascinating in terms of, was thinking about what you were talking about in terms of things being written down and being written down for a reason. We do it so we don't forget and that we remember. And, it's just funny as we talk about this stuff, I always have so many thoughts going through my head, but just even in that, we write things down so that they're not forgotten. But even within a generation, you can have a father who is doing great and is blessed by God, and then his son just totally, who saw his dad doing all the right things, doesn't do that, and I don't know. I guess it's just a little commercial, a little caveat of, if you don't spend a lot of time in the Old Testament because it's not interesting or you think it's too hard or whatever, I think, First and Second Kings is really just this, almost a series of a bunch of short stories of, here's this king and here's his story and this is what he did. And then here's the next king and here's what he did. And at that particular time, like we were talking about, Judah was separate. Israel, right? Mm-hmm. It's funny how my brain doesn't work too sometimes. Judah was separated from Israel, and Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign.
Seems like a good idea.
Yeah. So maybe for some of him, there was this going back and looking back at what had been written down, instead of living it from a heart place where you truly love God and desire to glorify him. You do it because it's written down and because, you're trying to replicate it falsely, not truly from a place of, true belief. But anyway, I'll get off that. I know that was a bit of a tangent, but
it's all good.
That's just what came to my mind as you were talking about that, of just the reality. And maybe that's kind of my theme for tonight. It's just the reality of the flesh trying to exist in harmony with the covenant and the law and all that. And it was certainly, people were certainly flawed. There was definitely fault with the people.
Yeah, and that goes back to one of the first things that I read from this passage from Bruce's commentary. It says the defect, meaning when it says the covenant was faulty, did not lie in the covenant law. It was good in itself, but to borrow Paul's language, it was weakened by the flesh, by the inadequacy of the human material which it had to work upon.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's exactly in the same vein, for sure. The last two verses say, and they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. So this was like, it tripped you up when you read it, and it tripped me up the first 3 times I read it, because it's such an awkward, it's such an awkward thing. But it didn't click with me until you tripped over it and then reread it again, where I was like, oh, if you take out the middle section in between the commas, which is,
right.
Yep. For they shall not teach, and they shall not teach, for they shall all know me. Like, they don't have to teach their neighbors. They don't have to teach their brothers, saying, you should know the Lord. They already do. There's no need to teach, because we're all good. Which is, wow, what a heck of a statement that is. That in the new covenant, or as a result of the new covenant, we won't have to look to our family members or to our neighbors or our coworkers and say, hey, have you heard the good news about Jesus? No, yeah. They already know. There's no need to have that conversation, or to, like, in the end, when the new heavens and new earth, right? We're all together and we're all partying with Jesus and each other. Everybody's part of the family that's there. And this is really cool too. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. Everybody, top to bottom, left to right, doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from. Everybody will know God. And if that wasn't enough, verse 12 says, for I will be merciful toward their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more.
Mm.
Merciful doesn't feel like a strong enough word in that
No.
scenario. And I think this is where English fails us without slapping on a bunch of really, 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 really super extra. No, I really, really mean it. I'll be merciful, like without making it silly, right? For I will be merciful toward their iniquities. Understatement. And I will remember their sins no more. And there's a tricky thing about forgiveness. You can say that you've forgiven somebody to make yourself feel better about the situation, but if you still remember their sin against you and you still hold it against them and it still makes you angry and you still feel hurt from it, have you really forgiven them? No, you really haven't. And this is something that currently I'm wrestling with real hard about a very significant situation in my life. And I like to think that I've forgiven this person and, you know, the pain that their decisions and actions have caused me and other people in my life. And there are moments when I realize that I still harbor incredible anger towards this person and what they did. And that in good moments, it feels like I've forgiven them and have been able to move on. But there are still moments where I want to bring it up and hold it against them, and that I'm still bearing a grudge and haven't been able to forgive them completely. Am I a long ways, from where I was a year ago? Absolutely. But it's one of those things where I know that God calls us to forgive others as he has forgiven us. And if we take that literally, then I'm not there yet. And I see all the wheels turning in your head, so I'm interested in what you have to say, so I'll shut up.
I don't know that I've completely formulated my. So forgiveness. I'm really having just that moment of like, it's not I don't believe it's a one-time act.
Mm.
And I may be speaking incorrectly, but so I'm having the moment of, so how many times should I forgive? Should I give them 7 times? No, you should forgive them 7 times 77, however that translation plays out.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always had it in my mind that was like each time I'm forgiving them is one more time that they have wronged me.
Yeah.
And I'm suddenly having this moment of, no, maybe it could be a single event that I have to forgive them 7 times 77. And again, I'm not saying this is good theology. I'm not saying this is right. But I really had this moment of, I've always viewed that as somebody continually harming me, continually needing to be forgiven because they continue to do things. And as you were speaking, it was like for the first time for me, I had this moment of like, no, maybe it could be just one thing, or many things that get played out, that get labeled as one big thing. And forgiveness is I definitely believe forgiveness is a process. I believe that very much. But that verse just suddenly was like, no, I may have to, Because even like what you said in terms of I feel like I've forgiven, and what's implied in that is that you have not.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's multiple times of forgiving. And the first time you did it you truly did forgive, but you might have to do it again. And I as I get older, I feel like I'm unpacking, undoing things that I felt like were like either my own improper understanding of what the Bible was saying or what was taught to me or whatever. But I'm just going to kind of wrap it up with this. For me, I guess I've always had this perspective of if you've truly done forgiveness right, then you don't remember it anymore. I remember it no more. But maybe it is that every time I do remember it, I forgive again. And I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
no, I get what you're saying. And I think where I'm landing on that right now, talk to me in 6 years and probably have a different answer,
Yeah, time.
But so what I think, because I don't think God has to do that. I think God forgives and it's done. It's a done deal, right?
And he doesn't, and again, I think there is a significance in the whole remembers no more. It's not forgetting. It's the choosing not to remember.
Yeah, it's an active choice on his part to say it's done, it's over, it's paid for, we're all moving on. But as we have both noted, we are not God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think from a human perspective, still in the process of sanctification, yet to be perfected, right? Still struggling with my sin has been forgiven, and yet I sin. Like you mentioned, reading about Paul in Romans, I'm thinking of the, wretched man that I am. What I do want to do, I don't do. What I don't want to do, I do. Just that whole wrestling with our sin nature, and yet being forgiven in all of the junk, right? I think from that perspective, yeah, we have to make that choice to forgive over and over and over again, because the sinful part of our being wants to bring that back up. That the enemy wants to rehash that and reopen that wound and feed the anger and feed the frustration, right? Just like Paul says that we have to die to ourselves, like each and every day, pick up our cross, and like we just have. It's that choice. It's the constant battle, right? That's why we've been given, the Holy Spirit, as a guide, as an intercessor, the armor of God to protect us from the enemy's advances and all of that. So, yeah, I agree with you from the human perspective that absolutely forgiveness is a process and is something that we need to choose every day. I just wish that we could be like God in this instance and just remember it no more. It's done. It's over. It's been paid for at my expense. But such is not the case.
No, and I think the other thing that I'm going to say this. I feel like somebody out there might need to hear this. Like, it's okay that the first time you forgave, it didn't quote unquote stick the way God's forgiveness sticks. It's okay that if daily you have to forgive somebody or hourly you have to forgive somebody, like that's okay. Just because we don't have the ability to do what God does and remember it no more, there's something redemptive in the continual choice to forgive every time we remember it.
Well, yes, and I think if I can take a stab at what that redemptive part is, right? It's every time that we forgive somebody else, it reminds us what God has done for us.
Yeah.
Which is infinitely more than what we're forgiving that person for. Yeah, even if what they did was heinous, horrific, I mean, just terrible in every way. I'm thinking like super nasty stuff, right? What God has forgiven us for is infinitely worse than that. And so in that process of choosing to forgive, we have to be reminded of God's forgiving us and what that means and what it cost him and what it affords us based on what it cost him.
Mm-hmm.
Heavy stuff, man.
Yep.
In a good way. In a very,
very
very
good
good way. I'm just now, because I'm a child, thinking of Wayne and Garth at the feet of Alice Cooper. We're not worthy. We're not worthy. And I've ruined the moment yet again.
No.
My brain just can't handle it. Sometimes I just have to go into silly mode. And then just to wrap, verse 13 says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Just, we're just going to tie this up in a nice little bow and just remind you, if it isn't clear yet, because I've spent the entire last chapter talking about it. Old one's over and done with. We got a new one. It's better. Let's carry on with the new covenant.
Amen.
And that brings us to the end of chapter 8, Dave.
Yeah.
I'm liking Hebrews so far. It's real good. I like it a lot.
See, and I thought of, that's real nice, Clark. Well.
Yeah, you gotta have a little levity, right?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Okay. All right. Well, friends, that brings us to the end of episode 185 of the Masterclass. Thank you so much for your time and your willingness to be a part of this whole thing. Still super cool that we get to do this, and still super cool that people choose to listen. It's still really, really, really cool.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the longer we do it, the cooler it gets. Like you would think that it would be the opposite, but like, I'm just like, still people listen to this? Like it's just, yeah, it's just really neat. So anyways, hope that this discussion was beneficial for you. I sure know it was for me.
Yep.
So show notes can be found at supermegacorp.net/masterclass/185, or if you're listening on a mobile device in a podcast app, they're right there. Swipe around, you'll find them. In there, you'll find links to all the different things we talked about in this passage, most of which will be Bible verses, which may be helpful for you. Which at this point, if you haven't used them yet, the episode's over, so sorry. But there'll also be links for ways to get in touch if you want to: email, phone, Twitter if that's your jam. Dave's link is there. Do you even check Twitter anymore, Dave?
I do. It's on. Yes.
Okay.
I was going to pull it up on my. I don't remember.
Is it David J. Hogue? Is that what it is? Your Twitter handle? I don't remember at all.
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Well, I better check the show notes then, because I might be linking to the wrong person. Mine's on there too. It's at Cam Brennan. I don't tweet a whole lot, but I check it occasionally. If you want to say hey or whatever, that'd be neat. It'd be fun to meet some new folks. Anyways, that is that. It's a wrap, Dave.
Until next time. Bye.